When scientists talk about hypotheses, they are careful to define terms. So before we can explore the idea that Earth might be a test, we need to clarify what test could possibly mean in a scientific framework. Unlike poetry or metaphor, science deals with concepts that must either generate measurable predictions or at least map onto known natural processes in a way that can be rigorously analyzed. In science, the closest parallels to the word test are filter, constraint, or evaluation system. A test, broadly speaking, is a process that distinguishes between different outcomes based on whether conditions are met or not. For example, in engineering, a material test might determine whether a beam can withstand a certain load. In medicine, a diagnostic test evaluates the presence or absence of a condition. And in biology, the process of natural selection functions like a continuous test of organisms against their environment. The difference is that in science, these processes do not imply intent. A rock does not intend to test whether a bridge will hold. The physical laws simply operate. So when we frame Earth as a test, scientifically, we are not saying Earth was designed with purpose. We are saying that Earth provides constraints and boundary conditions that function in ways similar to tests. These constraints force life, intelligence, and civilizations to adapt or fail. Let us consider first the scientific concept of falsifiability, introduced by philosopher Karl Popper. A scientific hypothesis must be framed so that it can, in principle, be proven wrong. For example, the hypothesis all swans are white was falsified the moment black swans were observed in Australia. If we propose Earth is a test, we have to be careful. Taken literally, this is not a falsifiable claim because test is not a physical law but a metaphor. But what we can do is translate the metaphor into specific scientific questions that are testable. For example, do species experience survival filters that eliminate some while allowing others to pass through? Do civilizations face recurrent systemic challenges that only some survive? Do planetary conditions constrain life in measurable, test-like ways? In this sense, the test becomes shorthand for a set of measurable filters and thresholds. Next, let us distinguish levels of testing. In biology, the level is the gene or the organism. DNA mutations are continuously tested against the environment. Some mutations spread because they confer survival or reproductive advantage, others disappear. In planetary science, the level is the entire biosphere. Earth's atmospheric composition, tectonics, and solar input create conditions that either allow life to persist or not. In cultural evolution, the level is society. Social systems are tested against crises, resource limits, or external pressures. Only those with sufficient adaptability continue. And in cosmology, the level is the universe itself. Physical constants determine whether stars, galaxies, and chemistry are possible. Each level has measurable thresholds that act like exams. For genes, the threshold is whether they increase fitness. For species, it is whether they survive extinction events. For societies, it is whether they maintain stability across generations. For planets, it is whether they remain habitable for billions of years. And for universes, it is whether they permit complexity at all. Another important concept is selection pressure. In evolutionary theory, a selection pressure is anything that influences which traits are advantageous. For example, predators test prey. A cheetah chasing a gazelle is not consciously administering an exam, but the encounter functions as one. Gazelles with faster reflexes are more likely to survive and pass on their genes. In this way, nature continuously tests traits without intent. Earth, as an environment, can be understood as the sum total of these pressures. Now, from a scientific standpoint, we must avoid anthropocentrism. Humans naturally like to imagine that Earth exists for us, or that it evaluates us in some cosmic way. But science asks us to remove ourselves from the center. Earth tests not only humans but all life. Dinosaurs were tested by an asteroid impact 66 million years ago, and most did not survive. Microbes are constantly tested by changes in temperature, salinity, or chemical exposure. Humanity is only one participant in this long-running process. So when we say Earth is a test, it must apply to the entire biosphere, not just us. One way to formalize this is to think in terms of boundary conditions. In physics and mathematics, a boundary condition is a limit that constrains possible solutions. For example, if you are solving an equation for a vibrating string, you need to know whether the ends of the string are fixed or free. Those conditions determine what solutions are allowed. Similarly, Earth provides boundary conditions, temperature ranges, atmospheric composition, available resources, and so on. Life is tested against these conditions. Only forms that fit survive. In addition, the idea of testing can be mapped onto resilience theory in ecology. Resilience is the capacity of a system to absorb disturbance and still maintain its basic function and structure. Ecosystems are tested whenever they face shocks, fires, storms, human activity. Some collapse, others reorganize and continue. By measuring resilience, ecologists are effectively scoring the performance of ecosystems under stress. Finally, let us address the question of purpose versus outcome. In everyday language, a test usually implies that someone has designed it. But in science, tests emerge naturally from systems with constraints. For example, boiling water tests whether a protein is stable at high temperatures. There is no designer, just physics and chemistry. In the same way, Earth is not intentionally testing species, but the outcome is indistinguishable from a test. Species either persist or they do not. So, in summary, Chapter 1 establishes our framework. To think scientifically about Earth as a test, we translate test into concepts like filter, boundary condition, selection pressure, and resilience measure. These are neutral, measurable, and non-anthropocentric. Once defined in this way, the hypothesis becomes scientifically tractable. The rest of our exploration, in later chapters, will look at how different disciplines reveal Earth's test-like nature at different scales, from genetic evolution to cosmic fine-tuning. Imagine for a moment that Earth is not just a natural outcome of cosmic processes, but rather the setting of a carefully designed test. From a scientific perspective, we can frame this idea by considering Earth as a closed or semi-closed system, in which variables such as atmosphere, water, energy input from the sun, and biological evolution are monitored. In real scientific research, laboratories often create controlled environments to study how systems behave under different conditions. Extending that model, one might imagine Earth itself functioning as a kind of planetary laboratory. To ground this idea, let's begin with the fundamentals of scientific experimentation. In any experiment, there are independent variables, dependent variables, and controlled variables. Independent variables are those that are deliberately changed. Dependent variables are the outcomes being measured. Controlled variables are kept constant to ensure accurate results. If Earth were a test, what would these variables be? Perhaps the independent variable is the presence of life itself. The dependent variable might be how life adapts to changing conditions, such as geological upheavals, shifts in climate, or cosmic events. The controlled variables could include the laws of physics, the stable orbit around the sun, and the relatively consistent flow of solar radiation that makes Earth habitable. From a cosmological standpoint, Earth is unique among the planets in our solar system because of its combination of liquid water, a stable climate, and a protective magnetic field. If we view Earth as a test, these features could be considered part of the initial conditions, carefully set at the beginning of the experiment. For instance, water is not just abundant here but exists in all three states, solid, liquid, and gas, within a narrow temperature range. This is unusual when compared to our neighboring planets, Mars and Venus, where water is either frozen or evaporated. If we were to think like experimentalists, this might suggest that liquid water is a critical factor being tested. How does life develop, spread, and adapt when such a resource is available? Another important angle is the role of time. In scientific experiments, time frames are often critical. Some experiments run for minutes or hours, while others can span decades. In the case of Earth, the timeline extends billions of years. Life appeared relatively quickly, within the first billion years of Earth's history. suggesting that under the right conditions, biological processes may begin spontaneously and robustly. From this view, one could argue that the test being run on Earth involves seeing whether life inevitably arises when certain chemical and environmental criteria are met. This is an idea closely linked to the field of abiogenesis, which studies how non-living chemical systems transition into living systems. If Earth is a test, then evolution becomes one of the central mechanisms through which results are generated. Evolution by natural selection, first clearly described by Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, is a process by which organisms adapt to their environment across generations. It is a natural algorithm, responding to selective pressures such as predators, food availability, and climate fluctuations. In an experimental sense, one could imagine that the results of this long-term test are recorded in the diversity of species, the structure of ecosystems, and the resilience of life through multiple mass extinctions. Furthermore, the test may not only involve life itself, but also intelligence. Human beings represent a unique development, combining advanced cognitive capacities, symbolic language, and the ability to manipulate the environment on a large scale. If this is part of the experimental design, then one of the key questions might be, does intelligence inevitably emerge in complex biospheres? Or is intelligence rare, a surprising byproduct of otherwise ordinary evolutionary processes? The answer to this question has profound implications for the search for extraterrestrial life and the broader scientific inquiry into whether we are alone in the universe. It is also worth considering the possibility that Earth's test is not isolated, but comparative. In science, tests are often run in parallel to compare outcomes. Perhaps other planets or exoplanets serve as control groups or alternative experimental setups. Mars, for example, appears to have had liquid water in the past, yet life either never developed there or has not yet been discovered. Venus once may have had a more temperate climate, but it entered a runaway greenhouse effect, becoming uninhabitable by our standards. If Earth is the experimental group where life flourished, then Mars and Venus could be seen as natural control groups, allowing comparisons across different environmental conditions. In the broader context of astrobiology, scientists often refer to the habitable zone, or the so-called Goldilocks zone, where conditions are neither too hot nor too cold for liquid water to persist. Earth sits squarely in this zone, suggesting that part of the test might be to determine how often planets in such zones actually develop life. With the discovery of thousands of exoplanets orbiting other stars, this question has become central to modern astronomy. Earth is a test, then the data it provides helps answer one of the most fundamental scientific questions. Is life common in the universe, or exceedingly rare? To summarize this first chapter, the scientific framing of Earth as a test allows us to see our planet as a vast experimental system. The constants of physics form the unchanging background. The initial conditions include the presence of water, an atmosphere rich in carbon-based chemistry, and a stable source of energy from the sun. The independent variables might include time, environmental changes, and cosmic events such as asteroid impacts. The dependent variables are the emergence, evolution, and persistence of life, and perhaps the rise of intelligence. This line of thinking does not require us to conclude that Earth literally is a design test. Rather, it provides a framework for understanding Earth scientifically as if it were one. This approach allows us to analyze life's processes, the planet's conditions, and humanity's role in a way that blends scientific rigor with philosophical reflection. Origins of Earth. Setting the initial conditions to understand Earth as a potential test, we first need to explore how the laboratory itself was assembled. In scientific terms, this takes us back 4.6 billion years to the very origins of our planet. The formation of Earth is best explained through the nebular hypothesis. According to this model, our solar system began as a vast molecular cloud of hydrogen, helium, and heavier elements that had been forged in earlier generations of stars. Over time, gravity pulled regions of this cloud together, initiating the collapse that would form a protostar, the early sun, at the center. Surrounding this protostar was a rotating disk of dust and gas. From this protoplanetary disk, the planets gradually formed. This early stage of planetary formation was not orderly, but violent. Particles within the disk collided and stuck together through electrostatic forces, gradually building up larger aggregates called planetesimals. Over millions of years, these planetesimals collided, accreted, and grew into protoplanets. In the case of Earth, the young planet underwent a series of massive impacts, the most significant of which likely gave rise to our moon. The leading theory, known as the giant impact hypothesis, suggests that a Mars-sized body, often referred to as Theia, collided with the proto-Earth. The debris from this collision eventually coalesced into the moon. From an experimental perspective, this violent beginning can be seen as the setup phase of the test. The Earth's composition was determined by the raw materials available in the protoplanetary disk: silicates, iron, nickel, and volatile compounds like water and carbon dioxide. The fact that Earth ended up with significant amounts of these volatiles is critical. Without them, our planet might have resembled Mercury, dry, small, and geologically inactive. The volatile-rich composition of Earth is one of the key variables in the test of life. Following its formation, Earth remained in a molten state for millions of years due to the immense heat generated by impacts, radioactive decay, and gravitational compression. During this time, differentiation occurred. Heavier elements like iron and nickel sank to form the core, while lighter silicates rose to form the mantle and crust. This process not only gave Earth its layered structure, but also set the stage for plate tectonics, a unique feature that would later prove crucial for regulating climate and recycling nutrients. Another essential factor was the acquisition of Earth's water. The exact origin of Earth's oceans is still debated. One hypothesis suggests that water was incorporated during the planet's initial formation from hydrated minerals. Another posits that water-rich comets and asteroids delivered much of it during the late heavy bombardment, around 4.1 to 3.8 billion years ago. Regardless of the source, the accumulation of liquid water on Earth's surface created one of the defining conditions of habitability. From an experimental standpoint, water can be seen as both a solvent and a medium, enabling complex chemical reactions that would eventually lead to life. At the same time, Earth developed a protective magnetic field. This magnetic field, generated by convection in the molten iron core, shields the planet from solar wind and cosmic radiation. Without it, the solar wind could strip away the atmosphere, as is thought to have happened on Mars. This magnetic shield can be interpreted as part of the experimental apparatus, preserving stable conditions on the planet's surface long enough for biological processes to unfold. The early atmosphere was also a critical factor. Unlike today's oxygen-rich air, Earth's primordial atmosphere was dominated by gases such as methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water vapor. This reducing environment provided the raw materials for organic chemistry. Laboratory experiments, such as the famous Miller-Urey experiment conducted in 1953, demonstrated that when such gases are exposed to energy sources like lightning, they can produce amino acids, the basic building blocks of proteins. In this way, Earth's atmosphere can be seen as a chemical chamber, primed to explore whether life can emerge spontaneously from non-living matter. Geological activity further enriched the environment. Volcanic eruptions released gases and minerals. Hydrothermal vents at the ocean floor spewed out hot, mineral-rich water, and constant impacts from asteroids and comets delivered new materials. These processes created a dynamic, ever-changing system, full of energy gradients. In modern system science, energy gradients are often identified as critical drivers of complexity. The Earth's young environment thus contained multiple overlapping gradients, thermal, chemical, and solar, that provided fertile ground for the emergence of life. Another key aspect is planetary stability. Despite its violent beginnings, Earth settled into a relatively stable orbit around the Sun. Its distance from the Sun placed it within the habitable zone, often referred to as the Goldilocks zone. Not too hot, not too cold, but just right for liquid water to persist. This orbital stability is reinforced by the presence of the Moon, which helps regulate Earth's axial tilt. Without this stabilizing influence, Earth's climate might have fluctuated far more wildly, making it difficult for life to gain a foothold. In viewing Earth's early history through the lens of a test, we can see the establishment of initial conditions. The raw materials, iron, silicates, carbon, water, were delivered and organized. The laboratory environment, magnetic field, atmosphere, oceans, was assembled. The energy sources, sunlight, geothermal heat, lightning, were put into place. Each of these factors corresponds to the careful setup of variables in a long-term experiment. The next phase, which we will explore in the following chapter, is the actual emergence of life. If Earth is indeed a test, then Chapter 3 begins with the moment the experiment truly starts, when non-living chemistry transitions into biology. Abiogenesis, the transition from chemistry to biology with the stage set, oceans in place, atmosphere established, and energy sources abundant. The next critical step in the hypothesis of Earth as a test is the origin of life itself. This stage is scientifically known as abiogenesis, the process by which non-living chemical systems transition into self-replicating, evolving entities we would recognize as life. Abiogenesis is not a matter of a single sudden transformation, but rather a sequence of gradual steps. Each step built upon the conditions established during Earth's early history, making it an excellent candidate for scientific investigation. If we imagine Earth as an experimental system, then this is the point at which the test begins to yield its first measurable results. The starting point is organic chemistry. Carbon is unique among the elements in its ability to form stable, complex molecules, including chains, rings, and three-dimensional frameworks. This versatility makes it the backbone of biological molecules. Earth's early environment. Simple molecules such as methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen interacted under the influence of energy sources like ultraviolet radiation from the sun, geothermal heat from volcanic vents, and electrical discharges in the atmosphere. These interactions produced more complex molecules, amino acids, nucleotides, and simple sugars. The Miller-Urey experiment in 1953 provided a crucial piece of evidence supporting this scenario. In their laboratory setup, a mixture of gases thought to resemble Earth's early atmosphere was exposed to sparks to simulate lightning. After a week, the experiment yielded amino acids and other organic compounds. While the exact composition of the early atmosphere is still debated, variations of this experiment have consistently shown that prebiotic chemistry can naturally generate biologically relevant molecules. From an experimental perspective, this suggests that the test of whether organic chemistry can arise under early Earth conditions has a clear positive result. However, amino acids and nucleotides alone do not constitute life. The next step in abiogenesis involves the assembly of polymers, long chains of these basic molecules. Proteins are chains of amino acids, while nucleic acids like RNA and DNA are chains of nucleotides. The challenge is that linking these monomers into polymers requires energy and specific environmental conditions. One plausible setting for this is hydrothermal vents at the ocean floor. These vents release mineral-rich, superheated water, creating natural gradients in temperature and chemistry. Laboratory simulations have shown that minerals such as clays can act as catalytic surfaces, concentrating molecules and facilitating polymerization. This brings us to one of the central questions. What came first, metabolism or information storage? Two major hypotheses attempt to answer this. The first is the metabolism-first hypothesis, which suggests that simple metabolic cycles could have developed spontaneously on mineral surfaces. These cycles would have provided energy and raw materials for further chemical evolution, setting the stage for more complex systems. The second is the RNA world hypothesis, which proposes that self-replicating RNA molecules were the first true lifelike systems. RNA is particularly compelling because it can act both as a carrier of genetic information and as a catalyst for chemical reactions. Laboratory studies have demonstrated that RNA molecules can catalyze their own replication under certain conditions, suggesting a plausible pathway from chemistry to biology. If we think of Earth as a test, then these two hypotheses represent alternative experimental pathways. Perhaps the experiment is designed to see which pathway, if any, emerges more robustly. It is possible that both pathways played roles, with metabolism providing stability and energy flow, while RNA supplied information and replication. Another critical feature of life is compartmentalization. Without boundaries, chemical systems disperse and reactions lose efficiency. In biology, this role is played by membranes composed of lipids. Interestingly, lipid molecules naturally self-assemble into bilayers when placed in water, forming vesicles that resemble primitive cell membranes. Laboratory experiments have shown that these vesicles can encapsulate RNA and other molecules, creating protocells. This spontaneous self-organization suggests that the boundary condition of life, the separation of inside from outside, may have been an inevitable outcome under early Earth conditions. Once polymers, metabolic cycles, and compartments emerged, the stage was set for natural selection to take over. At this point, chemical systems were no longer static. They could replicate with variation, and those variations influenced their survival. This is the threshold where chemistry crossed into biology. The test had moved into a new phase, determining whether life could persist, adapt, and evolve. From a scientific perspective, abiogenesis remains one of the greatest unsolved problems. We do not yet know the exact sequence of steps or the precise location where life began. Some theories suggest shallow ponds exposed to cycles of drying and rehydration may have facilitated polymerization. Others emphasize the stability and richness of deep-sea hydrothermal vents. There is also the panspermia hypothesis, which suggests that life, or its building blocks, may have arrived from elsewhere in the solar system or beyond. While panspermia shifts the problem rather than solving it, it expands the test to a cosmic scale. Regardless of the pathway, the outcome is clear. Within 1 billion years of Earth's formation, life had emerged. Fossilized microbial mats known as stromatolites, dating back more than 3.5 billion years, provide evidence of early, thriving ecosystems. These microbial communities used sunlight or chemical energy to sustain themselves, marking the beginning of biology's influence on the planet. From the viewpoint of Earth as a test, abiogenesis is the first major experimental milestone. The data suggest that under the right conditions, liquid water, energy sources, organic chemistry, and time, life is not only possible but perhaps inevitable. This result has enormous implications. If life arose so early on Earth, it strengthens the hypothesis that life may be common throughout the universe, wherever similar conditions exist. Evolutionary milestones, the long arc of biological change once life had emerged on Earth, the test entered a new and far more complex phase. No longer was it merely about chemical reactions in oceans or ponds. Now, dynamic, self-replicating organisms were present, interacting with each other and with the environment. From this point forward, the story of Earth as a test becomes the story of biological evolution, a process that unfolds over billions of years and leaves a measurable record in fossils, genetic sequences, and geological strata. At its core, evolution is a process governed by variation, heredity, and selection. Organisms produce offspring with small differences, some of which are inherited. Those variations that provide survival or reproductive advantages tend to persist in populations. Over time, these incremental changes accumulate, producing new traits, new species, and entirely new forms of life. In the context of Earth as a test, evolution is the mechanism by which results are generated. Each mutation, each adaptation, and each extinction provides data about how life responds to the conditions of the planetary laboratory. The earliest organisms were likely prokaryotic, cells without nuclei, similar to modern bacteria and archaea. These simple forms dominated Earth for billions of years. Despite their simplicity, they were remarkably diverse in metabolism. Some harnessed chemical energy from minerals at hydrothermal vents. Others evolved the ability to capture sunlight through photosynthesis, a process that would later reshape the planet itself. One of the most significant evolutionary milestones was the Great Oxidation Event, around 2.4 billion years ago. Photosynthetic microorganisms, particularly cyanobacteria, began releasing oxygen as a byproduct. Initially, this oxygen reacted with dissolved iron in the oceans, creating massive deposits of iron oxide known as banded iron formations. Once these sinks were saturated, oxygen began to accumulate in the atmosphere. This event was catastrophic for many anaerobic organisms, which could not tolerate oxygen, but it also opened entirely new pathways for energy metabolism. Oxygen allowed for much more efficient extraction of energy from organic molecules, paving the way for complex life. From the perspective of Earth as a test, this represents a dramatic shift in experimental conditions. Life not only adapted to its environment but actively transformed it, altering the atmosphere and fundamentally changing the rules of the system. Another crucial milestone was the emergence of eukaryotic cells, which contain internal compartments, including a nucleus. This step is often explained by the endosymbiotic theory, which proposes that eukaryotic cells originated when one prokaryote engulfed another, and instead of being digested, the engulfed cell lived inside its host, forming a mutually beneficial relationship. Mitochondria, the energy-producing organelles in our cells, are thought to have originated as free-living bacteria. Similarly, chloroplasts in plants trace back to cyanobacteria. This evolutionary innovation increased cellular complexity, allowing for greater specialization and efficiency. In the test analogy, eukaryotes represent a leap in the sophistication of experimental outcomes, new layers of structure and cooperation that open the door to multicellularity. The rise of multicellular life marks another turning point. Around 600 million years ago, in the late Precambrian, simple multicellular organisms began to appear. Multicellularity allowed organisms to grow larger, differentiate into specialized cell types, and exploit new ecological niches. This diversification set the stage for the Cambrian explosion, about 541 million years ago, when the fossil record shows a rapid appearance of most major animal groups. The Cambrian explosion is often seen as a key data point in the experiment. Once certain thresholds of complexity and environmental conditions were reached, biological diversity accelerated dramatically. Following this burst of diversification, life continued to adapt and radiate into every available habitat. Plants colonized land around 470 million years ago, followed by arthropods and vertebrates. The movement from water to land was a profound evolutionary challenge, requiring adaptations for desiccation resistance, structural support, and new methods of reproduction. Amphibians, for example, bridged the gap between aquatic and terrestrial life, leading eventually to reptiles, birds, and mammals. In each case, the test recorded how life solved new environmental problems through innovation and adaptation. Mass extinctions punctuated this evolutionary story. The Permian-Triassic extinction, about 252 million years ago, wiped out an estimated 90% of species, while the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, 66 million years ago, ended the reign of the non-avian dinosaurs. Though devastating, these events were also opportunities. They cleared ecological space, allowing survivors to diversify and fill new niches. From a testing framework, mass extinctions function like resets or perturbations, sudden changes in conditions designed to observe the resilience and creativity of life in response. One of the most remarkable outcomes of this evolutionary experiment is the rise of intelligence. Mammals, particularly primates, evolved large brains relative to body size, complex social behaviors, and eventually, symbolic thought. Humans represent the most advanced expression of this trend, capable of abstract reasoning, language, culture, and technology. This development raises profound questions in the test analogy. Is intelligence an intended outcome, or is it an unpredictable byproduct? If Earth is a test, then one of the critical questions might be whether intelligence is inevitable in complex biospheres or vanishingly rare. Genetics provides another dimension of evidence. The DNA sequences of organisms encode not only the instructions for life, but also a record of evolutionary history. Comparative genomics shows how genes are conserved, modified, and repurposed across species. For example, the same basic set of developmental genes known as Hox genes controls body patterning in fruit flies, fish, and humans. This continuity reveals that evolution is not a random assemblage of parts, but a coherent process that builds upon existing structures. It also demonstrates that the test results are cumulative. New outcomes emerge not from scratch but from modifications of earlier successes. In modern science, evolution is studied not only through fossils and DNA, but also through direct observation. Microorganisms, with their rapid reproduction, can evolve resistance to antibiotics within years or even months. This real-time evolution illustrates the same principles that have operated for billions of years, reinforcing that the test is ongoing and continuous. From the perspective of Earth as a test, the evolutionary milestones are the most significant data outputs. They show how life responds to changing variables, oxygen levels, climate shifts, asteroid impacts, continental drift. They reveal the creative potential of natural selection to generate complexity, diversity, and even intelligence. And they demonstrate that life is not passive, but actively shapes the conditions of the experiment, altering the atmosphere, the climate, and the geology of the planet. Earth's regulatory systems, the balance that sustains life. One of the most remarkable features of our planet is not simply that life arose here, but that it has persisted for billions of years despite dramatic changes in solar radiation, asteroid impacts, volcanic activity, and continental drift. From a scientific perspective, this persistence suggests that Earth is regulated by interconnected systems that help maintain habitability. If we frame Earth as a test, then this chapter examines the regulatory mechanisms of the experiment, processes that stabilize conditions, respond to disruptions, and allow life to continue. At the foundation of these regulatory processes is the concept of homeostasis, a term borrowed from biology but applicable on a planetary scale. In living organisms, homeostasis refers to the ability to maintain internal stability, such as temperature or pH, within narrow limits despite external fluctuations. On Earth, homeostasis emerges from the interaction of physical, chemical, and biological systems. This concept is often explored through the Gaia hypothesis, proposed by James Lovelock and Lynn Margulies, which suggests that life and the Earth's environment co-evolve in a way that stabilizes conditions favorable for life. While not universally accepted in its strongest form, many elements of this idea are supported by scientific evidence. A prime example of planetary regulation is the carbon cycle. Carbon is essential for life, forming the backbone of organic molecules, but it also plays a central role in regulating climate through carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Too much carbon dioxide leads to runaway warming, while too little would plunge the planet into a frozen state. The carbon cycle operates through multiple reservoirs: the atmosphere, the oceans, the biosphere, and the geosphere. Volcanoes release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, while weathering of rocks and the formation of carbonate minerals draw it down. Plants and photosynthetic organisms absorb carbon dioxide during growth, while respiration and decomposition return it. Over geological timescales, the burial of organic carbon in sediments locks away carbon, while tectonic processes eventually recycle it through subduction and volcanic outgassing. This interplay creates a long-term thermostat, preventing Earth from veering too far in either direction. The existence of liquid water for billions of years, despite the Sun becoming about 30% brighter since Earth's formation, is evidence of the effectiveness of this regulatory system. This puzzle, known as the faint young sun paradox, highlights how finely tuned the balance has been. Another key regulatory system is the water cycle, which circulates water through evaporation, condensation, precipitation, and runoff. This cycle not only sustains life but also moderates temperature. The high heat capacity of water stabilizes climate by absorbing and releasing heat slowly, buffering against extreme fluctuations. Clouds formed from condensed water vapor reflect sunlight, cooling the planet, while water vapor itself is a greenhouse gas trapping heat. These dual roles create feedback loops, some stabilizing, others amplifying, that influence climate. Biological activity further reinforces planetary stability. Photosynthesis is central to this role. By converting carbon dioxide into organic matter and releasing oxygen, photosynthetic organisms regulate both atmospheric composition and energy flow. The oxygenation of the atmosphere not only enabled aerobic metabolism, but also created the ozone layer, which shields life from harmful ultraviolet radiation. Without this biological feedback, Earth's surface might have remained hostile to complex organisms. Another striking example of regulatory feedback is the role of marine microorganisms in the sulfur cycle. Certain plankton produce dimethyl sulfide, which escapes into the atmosphere and contributes to cloud formation. More clouds increase Earth's reflectivity, cooling the planet. In this way, tiny organisms in the ocean exert a planetary-scale influence, helping regulate climate. This illustrates a core principle of Earth's test-like system. Small-scale processes can produce large-scale stability. Plate tectonics is also central to Earth's long-term regulation. The movement of tectonic plates recycles materials, drives volcanic outgassing, and shapes continents and ocean basins. Subduction zones carry carbon-rich sediments back into the mantle, while mid-ocean ridges release heat and minerals that support unique ecosystems. Without tectonic activity, Earth might resemble Mars, a geologically quiet planet that lost much of its atmosphere and surface water over time. Tectonics, then, is part of the experimental design, maintaining the dynamic environment necessary for life's resilience. Climate regulation involves not just slow geological processes, but also rapid feedbacks. For example, the ice-albedo feedback influences global temperature. Ice and snow reflect most incoming sunlight, cooling the planet. As ice melts, darker land and ocean surfaces are exposed, absorbing more heat and accelerating warming. Conversely, when ice expands, cooling is reinforced. Throughout Earth's history, this feedback has driven cycles of glaciation, including snowball Earth episodes when ice may have covered much of the planet. These extreme events tested the resilience of life, yet the regulatory systems eventually restored balance, allowing ecosystems to recover and diversify. In addition to physical and chemical feedbacks, the biosphere itself acts as a regulator. Forests, wetlands, and oceans act as carbon sinks, drawing down atmospheric carbon dioxide. The distribution of vegetation influences albedo, water cycles, and nutrient flows. When humans burn fossil fuels or clear forests, these regulatory systems are disrupted, illustrating their central role in planetary stability. The fact that Earth remained habitable for billions of years before human influence underscores how robust these natural systems are. Energy flow through ecosystems provides another regulatory dimension. The sun delivers a constant stream of energy, most of which is absorbed by land, oceans, and atmosphere. Life harnesses only a small fraction of this energy through photosynthesis, but that fraction sustains the entire biosphere. Food webs channel energy from producers to consumers to decomposers, recycling nutrients and maintaining balance. Without this cycling, ecosystems would collapse, disrupting the experiment's trajectory. An often overlooked but critical regulator is the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is essential for proteins and nucleic acids, yet atmospheric nitrogen, N2, is inert and unavailable to most organisms. Specialized microbes convert nitrogen into usable forms through processes like nitrogen fixation, nitrification, and denitrification. These microbial pathways ensure a steady supply of this critical nutrient. Once again, microscopic processes scale up to planetary importance. Seen together, these regulatory systems create a remarkable pattern. Despite enormous external shocks, such as asteroid impacts or changes in solar output, Earth has repeatedly restored conditions suitable for life. This resilience suggests that the planet operates not as a static system, but as a dynamic, self-regulating network. If Earth is a test, then one of its key questions is, can life and environment co-regulate each other to sustain habitability over geological timescales? So far, the results indicate that the answer is yes. Yet regulation is not perfect. Mass extinctions remind us that stability has limits. Catastrophic events can overwhelm regulatory systems, wiping out large fractions of life. But even in these cases, recovery eventually occurs, often with bursts of innovation and diversification. The experiment seems to include not only stability but also periodic disruption, perhaps to explore resilience and adaptability. As we consider Earth's regulatory systems, we see that the test is not one-sided. Life is not simply a passive subject reacting to conditions. It is an active participant, shaping and stabilizing the environment in ways that feed back into its own survival. The interaction between geology, chemistry, and biology creates a co-evolving system, unlike anything we know elsewhere. The role of mass extinctions in Earth's experiment when we view Earth as a potential test environment. One of the most striking features of its history is the occurrence of mass extinctions. These events are not minor fluctuations in biodiversity. They are profound resets of the biological landscape, eliminating vast numbers of species across multiple ecosystems in relatively short geological timeframes. If Earth is indeed an experiment, then mass extinctions can be thought of as major stress tests, interruptions that challenge life's ability to recover, adapt, and continue. Defining mass extinction. A mass extinction is defined as a widespread and geologically rapid event in which a significant proportion of Earth species vanish. While extinctions occur continuously, scientists estimate that over 99% of all species that have ever lived are now extinct. Mass extinctions represent extraordinary spikes above the background extinction rate. Typically, 5 such events are recognized as the Big Five, though some researchers argue that a 6th is now underway, driven by human activity. The Big Five are Ordovician, Silurian extinction, 444 million years ago, Late Devonian extinction, 359 million years ago, Permian, Triassic extinction, 252 million years ago, Triassic, Jurassic extinction, 201 million years ago, Cretaceous, Paleogene extinction, 66 million years ago. Each of these events was triggered by different mechanisms, yet they share the common outcome of drastically altering the evolutionary trajectory of life. The Ordovician, Silurian extinction roughly 444 million years ago. During the Ordovician period, marine biodiversity flourished. Oceans teemed with trilobites, brachiopods, corals, and early vertebrates. But this richness was abruptly interrupted by one of the most severe extinctions in history. Estimates suggest that 85% of marine species vanished. The likely cause was global cooling, triggered by the rapid expansion of glaciers on the supercontinent Gondwana. As ice sheets grew, sea levels dropped, reducing shallow marine habitats where most life thrived. Oxygen levels in the oceans fell, and ecosystems collapsed. Later, as glaciers melted, sea levels rose again, but ecosystems were already devastated. From the perspective of Earth as a test, This extinction revealed how sensitive marine ecosystems were to climate shifts and sea level changes. It forced life to diversify into new ecological niches once conditions stabilized. The late Devonian extinction about 372–359 million years ago, the Devonian period, often called the Age of Fishes, ended with a prolonged crisis. Unlike other extinctions that occurred rapidly, the late Devonian event spanned several million years, wiping out 75% of species. The causes remain debated. Hypotheses include widespread anoxia, lack of oxygen in the oceans, possibly driven by nutrient runoff from land plants that were just beginning to colonize continents. The evolution of vascular plants altered weathering rates, soil development, and nutrient cycles, unintentionally destabilizing marine environments. Asteroid impacts and volcanic activity may also have contributed. The Devonian extinction highlights a key experimental dimension. Life itself can destabilize Earth systems. The rise of land plants reshaped atmospheric carbon dioxide levels and nutrient flows, creating feedbacks that unintentionally harmed marine ecosystems. The Permian-Triassic extinction. The Great Dying. The most catastrophic extinction in Earth's history occurred 252 million years ago. Known as the Permian-Triassic extinction, or the Great Dying, it eliminated over 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates. Coral reefs disappeared entirely, and whole groups of organisms never recovered. The leading explanation is massive volcanic activity in Siberia, creating what is now known as the Siberian traps. These eruptions released vast amounts of carbon dioxide and methane, triggering runaway greenhouse warming. Oceans became acidic and anoxic, devastating marine life. Temperatures soared, ecosystems collapsed, and the biosphere nearly reset. From the experimental viewpoint, this event tested the limits of planetary resilience. Life came perilously close to being extinguished. Yet, astonishingly, recovery occurred. The extinction cleared ecological niches, paving the way for new groups, notably the ancestors of dinosaurs and, much later, mammals. The Triassic, Jurassic extinction roughly 201 million years ago, another extinction reshaped the biosphere. This event eliminated about 80% of species, including many large amphibians and reptilian groups. The causes are linked to massive volcanic eruptions associated with the breakup of the supercontinent Pangaea, releasing carbon dioxide and driving climate shifts. The survivors included the early dinosaurs, which soon diversified and came to dominate the Mesozoic era. Once again, mass extinction acted as an evolutionary filter, eliminating some lineages while opening opportunities for others. The test, in this case, seemed designed to explore the potential of entirely new ecosystems. The Cretaceous, Paleogene extinction, perhaps the most famous extinction, occurred 66 million years ago, marking the end of the age of dinosaurs, except for birds. This event was triggered by the impact of a large asteroid near present-day Chicxulub, Mexico. The impact released energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs, ejecting dust and aerosols into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight and disrupting photosynthesis. Within years, ecosystems collapsed. Dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and many marine reptiles vanished, along with around 75% of all species. But the extinction also paved the way for mammals, which diversified rapidly in the aftermath. Eventually, one lineage of mammals would give rise to primates, and much later humans. From the perspective of the Earth as a test framework, this event highlights how catastrophic disruptions can redirect evolution entirely. Without the asteroid, dinosaurs might still dominate, and humans might never have arisen. Patterns and lessons from mass extinctions. When we compare these events, certain patterns emerge: diverse causes, similar outcomes. Extinctions have been triggered by climate shifts, volcanic activity, asteroid impacts, ocean anoxia, and biotic innovations. Yet they consistently result in widespread biodiversity loss followed by recovery and diversification. Resilience and innovation. Life almost always rebounds, often in novel ways. Extinctions act as creative resets, eliminating dominant groups and allowing new ones to flourish. This suggests that the test is not about preserving stability but about exploring adaptability, biology as a double-edged sword. Sometimes life destabilizes itself. The evolution of land plants, for instance, contributed to the Devonian extinction. This raises the possibility that intelligence, humanity's defining trait, could trigger a similar disruption in the present. The role of chance. Random external events like asteroid impacts remind us that contingency plays a central role in Earth's history. The test may include stochastic elements, probing how life responds to unpredictable shocks. Extinctions as experiments within the test. If Earth is a controlled experiment, mass extinctions may serve specific purposes. They might function as stress tests, pushing life to its limits, revealing the mechanisms of resilience, resets, clearing ecological overcrowding to allow new innovations, branch selectors, determining which lineages will dominate future eras. From this angle, extinctions are not failures but integral features of the system, designed to explore the boundaries of life's persistence. The current extinction crisis today, many scientists warn that we may be entering a sixth mass extinction, driven by human activity. Habitat destruction, climate change, pollution, and overexploitation are causing species to vanish at rates far above background levels. Unlike past extinctions triggered by natural phenomena, this one is driven by a single species, us. This raises profound questions. Is humanity itself the latest stress test? Are we both the subject and the agent of the experiment? And if so, will we prove capable of mitigating our impact, or will we trigger another catastrophic reset, recovery, and innovation? How life rebounds after catastrophe. One of the most remarkable features of Earth's biological history is not just the occurrence of mass extinctions, but what happens afterward. Time and again, after ecosystems collapse and biodiversity plummets, life rebounds. The fossil record demonstrates that recovery is rarely immediate. It often takes millions of years. Yet, when recovery does occur, it frequently leads to entirely new ecosystems, new evolutionary pathways, and greater levels of biological complexity than before. If we frame Earth as a test, then these rebounds are among the most critical observations. They reveal not only life's capacity for resilience, but also its ability to innovate under radically changed conditions. Defining recovery in the context of evolution. When scientists talk about recovery from extinction events, they are not referring to a simple return to the way things were. Instead, recovery involves the emergence of new species, the restructuring of ecosystems, and often the rise of previously minor lineages into ecological dominance. Recovery is therefore less about restoration and more about transformation. Measured in geological terms, full recovery from a mass extinction typically requires between 5 to 30 million years. During this time, ecosystems transition through a series of phases: initial survival, diversification of surviving lineages, expansion into ecological niches left vacant by extinct organisms, and finally, stabilization into new community structures. From the perspective of Earth as a test, these stages act like a long-term resilience metric. They show how quickly and in what ways life reorganizes after massive disruptions. The aftermath of the Ordovician, Silurian extinction. Following the Ordovician, Silurian extinction around 444 million years ago, marine biodiversity had been devastated. Yet within tens of millions of years, life diversified again. New groups of jawed fishes appeared, corals re-established themselves, and early terrestrial ecosystems began to expand. The key takeaway is that extinction did not permanently suppress evolutionary innovation. Instead, it cleared ecological space, allowing lineages that had been marginal before to flourish. In the test analogy, this looks like a built-in mechanism to prevent stagnation. Catastrophic loss followed by diversification ensures that evolutionary exploration continues. The Devonian extinction and the rise of land vertebrates. The late Devonian extinction, which eliminated many marine organisms, created opportunities for survivors. Among the beneficiaries were early tetrapods, vertebrates with limbs capable of supporting them on land. With marine environments destabilized, terrestrial ecosystems became the new frontier. By the Carboniferous period, lush forests dominated by ferns and seed plants spread across continents, and amphibians diversified rapidly. Insects also underwent major evolutionary radiation, some growing to massive sizes thanks to higher oxygen levels. This rebound illustrates a key experimental outcome. After a collapse in one domain, the oceans, life surged in another, land. In terms of the test, this was a shift of focus, probing whether life could thrive in fundamentally different environments. Recovery after the Great Dying, the Permian-Triassic extinction, or the Great Dying, nearly annihilated life. Yet from this devastation, entirely new ecosystems arose. In the oceans, surviving lineages gave rise to modern coral reefs, as new groups of reef-building organisms appeared. On land, early archosaurs diversified, eventually giving rise to dinosaurs. What is striking is that recovery was unusually slow. It took roughly 10 million years before ecosystems stabilized. This sluggish rebound suggests that the environmental stressors, greenhouse warming, ocean acidification, and anoxia, persisted long after the extinction trigger. In the test framework, this can be viewed as a prolonged stress condition, forcing life to adapt not only to immediate devastation, but also to lingering environmental instability. Yet the long-term result was extraordinary. Ecosystems reorganized in ways that led to the dominance of reptiles, the eventual emergence of mammals, and new levels of ecological complexity. The Triassic, Jurassic reset and dinosaur ascendancy. The Triassic, Jurassic extinction, caused by volcanic activity and climate shifts, cleared away many competitors of early dinosaurs. Within a few million years, dinosaurs diversified into a wide array of forms, occupying niches from massive herbivores to swift predators. Pterosaurs took to the skies, and marine reptiles dominated the oceans. This illustrates a recurring theme. Extinctions serve as filters. They do not wipe life clean, but they eliminate dominant groups and allow survivors to radiate into new roles. From the experimental lens, the lesson is that dominance is temporary, and resilience is rewarded. Post-Cretaceous recovery and the rise of mammals. The asteroid impact that ended the age of non-avian dinosaurs 66 million years ago was catastrophic. Yet within a relatively short span of 10 million years, mammals began diversifying dramatically. With dinosaurs gone, mammals expanded in size, form, and ecological role. Primates emerged, eventually giving rise to humans. Birds, the only surviving dinosaurs, also radiated into thousands of species. This rebound is particularly striking because it directly shaped the conditions for human existence. Without the extinction of dinosaurs, mammals might have remained small and marginal. The test outcome in this case seems almost as if it were designed to explore whether intelligence and culture could arise once ecological dominance shifted to a new group. Mechanisms of innovation after extinctions. Why does recovery often lead to innovation rather than stagnation? Several mechanisms are at play. Ecological vacancies. When dominant species vanish, resources and habitats become available for survivors to exploit. This encourages rapid diversification. Genetic potential. Lineages that survive often have latent capacities that can be expressed in new environments. For example, the ancestors of mammals already had traits like warm-bloodedness and complex teeth, which became advantageous in post-dinosaur ecosystems. Environmental restructuring. Extinctions often coincide with climate shifts, new land formations, or ocean chemistry changes. Survivors must adapt to these altered conditions, which accelerates evolutionary change. Adaptive radiation. Small groups of survivors diversify rapidly to fill ecological roles left empty. Examples include mammals after the Cretaceous extinction and fishes after the Devonian. In the experimental analogy, these mechanisms function like reset conditions. Once a system is disrupted, it reorganizes in novel directions, testing possibilities that would not have emerged under stable conditions. Lessons about resilience recovery after extinction events demonstrates that resilience is not about preservation, but about transformation. The biosphere does not simply return to its prior state, it reconfigures. Each extinction followed by rebound adds to the cumulative complexity of Earth's history. This has two implications for the idea of Earth as a test. First, the experiment appears designed to probe resilience, not by asking whether life can survive, but by examining how it survives and in what new forms. Second, it suggests that the test values diversity and innovation, since rebounds consistently result in greater complexity. Recovery, in the present context as scientists warn of a potential sixth mass extinction driven by human activity, questions of resilience take on immediate relevance. If humanity causes a collapse, what will recovery look like? Will new forms of life dominate millions of years in the future? Or will the unique conditions created by human technology alter the rules of recovery itself? The past tells us that life will recover, eventually. But it also tells us that the shape of that recovery depends on which lineages survive and how they adapt. If Earth is a test, then we are now both participants and drivers, potentially shaping the outcome of the next rebound. The emergence of intelligence and consciousness, the long story of life on Earth, has been dominated by biological survival and adaptation, organisms adjusting to shifting climates, ecosystems, and catastrophic events. But in the last fraction of geological time, a new dimension of complexity appeared: intelligence. Intelligence is more than problem-solving or instinctive behavior. It involves flexibility, learning, planning, and, at higher levels, abstract thought. At its peak in humans, intelligence is coupled with self-awareness, language, symbolic reasoning, and culture. If Earth is a test, then the rise of intelligence represents one of its most striking outcomes, because it is not just a biological adaptation but a phenomenon that reshapes the planet itself. Defining intelligence in biological terms, intelligence is notoriously difficult to define. In biology, it is often described as the capacity of an organism to process information, learn from experience, and modify behavior accordingly. Even simple organisms show primitive forms of this. For example, bacteria can move toward nutrients and away from toxins, guided by chemical gradients. While this is not intelligence in the human sense, it is still a form of adaptive response to information. As nervous systems evolved, intelligence took on more advanced forms. Nerve cells allowed organisms to sense their environment with increasing precision and coordinate more complex responses. Brains, particularly those with specialized regions for memory, vision, and decision-making, enabled learning and problem-solving. Intelligence is therefore not an all-or-nothing trait but a continuum, appearing in varying degrees across the animal kingdom. The evolutionary path to intelligence: the earliest multicellular animals, appearing over 600 million years ago, had simple nerve nets, diffuse networks of neurons without central brains. Jellyfish today retain this design. While limited, such systems allowed coordination of movement and responses to stimuli. Over time, evolution favored organisms with more centralized nervous systems. The development of cephalization, the concentration of sensory organs and neural tissue at the front of the body, marked an important step. It allowed animals to process information more efficiently as they moved forward through their environments. By the Cambrian explosion, around 541 million years ago, more complex brains had already appeared. Arthropods, mollusks, and early vertebrates developed sensory systems and neural structures that allowed them to hunt, avoid predators, and navigate diverse habitats. In this sense, intelligence began not as abstract thought but as survival efficiency, the ability to react quickly and flexibly to challenges. The rise of vertebrate brains. Vertebrates underwent a particularly dramatic expansion of brain complexity. Fish developed regions specialized for vision and motor control. Amphibians and reptiles added more advanced sensory integration. Birds evolved highly efficient brains relative to body size, capable of complex vocalizations and tool use. Mammals, with their layered cerebral cortices, expanded intelligence further. Within mammals, primates represent a special case. Their brains, particularly the neocortex, grew disproportionately large relative to body size. This expansion supported advanced memory, problem-solving, and social cognition. Living in groups created evolutionary pressure to track alliances, recognize individuals, and interpret social signals, skills that require higher-order intelligence. In other words, intelligence in primates was not just about survival in the environment, but survival in complex societies. Non-human intelligence. Before considering humans, it is essential to recognize the diversity of intelligence in other species. Octopuses, for example, are renowned for problem-solving, short-term memory, and tool use, despite being mollusks with very different brain architectures from vertebrates. Crows and parrots demonstrate advanced problem-solving, tool use, and even the ability to understand abstract rules. Dolphins and whales display sophisticated social behaviors, communication, and cooperative hunting strategies. These examples show that intelligence has evolved multiple times, independently, in different lineages. This suggests that under certain conditions, natural selection favors greater cognitive ability. From the test perspective, this raises a profound question. Is intelligence an inevitable outcome of complex evolution, or is it an unlikely accident? The emergence of human intelligence represents the most extreme elaboration of these trends. Over the past 2 million years, the genus Homo underwent rapid brain expansion. Homo habilis, around 2.4 million years ago, used stone tools. Homo erectus, emerging about 1.9 million years ago, had a larger brain and evidence of organized hunting and fire use. By the time of Homo sapiens, roughly 300,000 years ago, brains had reached modern sizes, and symbolic thought, art, and language had appeared. What drove this rapid expansion? Several hypotheses exist. The social brain hypothesis. Living in large groups required individuals to track complex relationships, deception, cooperation, and competition. Brains evolved to handle these challenges. The ecological intelligence hypothesis. Humans adapted to environments where tool use, planning, and innovation provided survival advantages, particularly in unpredictable climates. The cultural evolution hypothesis. Once language and symbolic communication emerged, ideas could be shared, stored, and built upon across generations, accelerating the feedback loop of intelligence. Each of these pressures likely contributed. Human intelligence may therefore be best understood as a multi-layered adaptation. Ecological, social, and cultural. The nature of consciousness intelligence in humans is coupled with consciousness, the subjective experience of being aware. Consciousness is one of the deepest scientific mysteries, bridging biology, psychology, and philosophy. Neuroscience shows that specific brain structures, such as the thalamus and cerebral cortex, are crucial for conscious experience. But how the firing of neurons produces subjective awareness is still unresolved. From the test framework, the emergence of consciousness may represent a threshold phenomenon. For billions of years, life operated without self-awareness. Then, through cumulative neural complexity, organisms emerged that not only acted on the environment but reflected on themselves and their place within it. If the test is probing the limits of life's potential, consciousness might be one of the rarest and most significant results. Intelligence as a planetary force. With the rise of human intelligence, the experiment on Earth shifted dramatically. Humans did not merely adapt to the environment, they reshaped it. Through agriculture, urbanization, and technology, humans became a geological force. Some scientists propose we have entered a new epoch, the Anthropocene, defined by human impact on climate, biodiversity, and the planet's systems. From the test analogy, this represents a striking result. Intelligence can become a planetary-scale driver, comparable to tectonics or volcanism. This outcome raises questions. Is the test designed to see if intelligence can arise naturally? Or is it designed to see whether intelligence can coexist with long-term planetary stability? Is intelligence rare or inevitable? Astrobiology considers whether intelligence is a common outcome of evolution or a rare accident. On Earth, intelligence beyond instinct has evolved multiple times, in cephalopods, birds, mammals. But human-level intelligence, coupled with culture and technology, appears to have arisen only once. If intelligence were inevitable, we might expect multiple lineages to have reached human-like levels by now. If it is rare, then humanity may be an extraordinary outlier in the experiment. This distinction matters profoundly if we consider Earth as a testbed for understanding life in the universe. The test perspective on intelligence from the vantage point of Earth as a test. Intelligence could be evaluated in several ways, as an endpoint. Perhaps the test is designed to see if life can evolve to the point of self-awareness and advanced cognition. As a stressor, intelligence introduces new challenges, weapons, overexploitation, climate alteration. The test may examine whether intelligence destabilizes or sustains biospheres. As a potential bridge, intelligence enables technology, space exploration, and perhaps the capacity to spread life beyond Earth. The test might probe whether life can transcend planetary boundaries. In all interpretations, the emergence of intelligence is one of the most dramatic and consequential outcomes of Earth's biological experiment. Survival of intelligence, cognitive and neurological thresholds. When scientists look at the story of life on Earth, one of the most striking features is the gradual rise of intelligence. Intelligence is not a sudden invention. It is not something that appeared only in humans. Instead, it is an incremental and layered development, built slowly through billions of years of biological trial and error. In many ways, it functions like a sequence of cognitive tests that species must pass to reach higher forms of awareness. To explore the idea of Earth as a test, we need to carefully examine these thresholds of intelligence, how they emerged, and why only a few species managed to cross into the realm of complex symbolic reasoning. We can begin with the most fundamental behaviors that demonstrate even the simplest form of intelligence. For example, bacteria exhibit chemotaxis. This is the ability to sense chemical gradients in their environment and swim toward nutrients or away from toxins. At first glance, this may seem mechanical, but it is already a form of problem solving. The organism is detecting signals, processing them internally, and responding with movement that increases its survival chances. In computational terms, this is an early version of input, processing, and output, a biological algorithm. From a scientific perspective, this marks the first threshold, the test of basic information processing. If life is to succeed on Earth, it must develop ways to gather and act on information. The next significant leap occurs in multicellular organisms with nervous systems. The nervous system represents a dramatic upgrade in processing capacity. Neurons allow for rapid signaling, coordination of muscles, and integration of sensory information. This marks the second cognitive threshold, the test of adaptive responsiveness. Creatures like jellyfish and worms show how even relatively simple neural networks allow for behaviors such as coordinated swimming or avoidance of predators. This shows us that the test becomes more complex, not only reacting to the environment, but doing so flexibly and in real time. Over hundreds of millions of years, nervous systems diversified and scaled upward. The vertebrate brain, with its layered structures, offered the potential for increasingly sophisticated forms of intelligence. The fish brain introduced more advanced sensory integration, while reptiles added better motor control and learning capabilities. With birds and mammals, we see the dramatic expansion of the forebrain, especially the cerebral cortex. This expansion is significant because it enables pattern recognition, planning, and in some species, social cooperation. The scientific study of comparative neuroanatomy makes it clear that intelligence is not evenly distributed across life forms. Instead, Earth seems to present a test that only some species cross. In mammals such as dolphins, elephants, and primates, the capacity for self-awareness appears. Experiments using the mirror test, where an animal is marked with paint and given access to a mirror, reveal that some species recognize themselves rather than treating the reflection as another individual. This level of cognition suggests the emergence of metacognition, the ability to think about one's own thinking. Here we encounter the third major threshold, the test of self-awareness. It is worth noting that not all intelligent animals pass this test, but those that do demonstrate capacities closer to human-like reasoning. Within primates, and especially hominins, intelligence was shaped further by ecological and social pressures. The demands of surviving in varied environments required flexible tool use. Archaeological evidence from sites like Olduvai Gorge shows that early Homo species, such as Homo habilis, were crafting stone tools over 2 million years ago. This indicates foresight, planning, and the ability to transmit techniques across generations. Toolmaking itself can be considered a form of problem-solving test, a tangible sign of crossing yet another threshold. But intelligence did not stop with tool use. The social brain hypothesis proposes that the size of primate brains, particularly the neocortex, is linked to the complexity of their social groups. To manage alliances, hierarchies, and cooperation, an individual needs to track the behavior of many others. This creates selective pressure for enhanced memory, communication, and emotional intelligence. Thus, one of the most significant tests imposed by Earth may not be merely environmental, but social. To survive in large groups, hominins had to pass the test of social cognition. Those that failed were less likely to thrive in cooperative systems. The emergence of symbolic thought, language, and abstract reasoning represents perhaps the most critical threshold of all. Linguistics and cognitive archaeology suggest that modern humans developed fully syntactical language around 50,000 to 100,000 years ago. This ability transformed human cognition by allowing information to be stored externally in culture rather than solely in the brain. Oral traditions, myths, and instructions could be transmitted across generations, effectively multiplying intelligence across time. From a scientific perspective, this moment can be seen as the test of externalized cognition, the ability to share and accumulate knowledge beyond the limits of an individual brain. It is important to emphasize that intelligence is not merely about solving puzzles or using tools. It is also about long-term adaptability. Homo sapiens demonstrated this adaptability by colonizing every continent, surviving in climates ranging from the Arctic tundra to the Sahara Desert. This required innovations such as clothing, fire mastery, and cooperative hunting strategies. In evolutionary terms, adaptability is the final arbiter of whether intelligence truly passes the survival test. Many other hominin species, such as Homo neanderthalensis and Homo erectus, displayed impressive intelligence, but they did not endure. Modern humans, for reasons still debated, became the sole survivors. Was it superior language, broader cooperation, or sheer luck? Scientists are still investigating, but the outcome is clear. In the test of adaptability, only Homo sapiens remained. Neuroscience today allows us to peer into the biological mechanisms that make this possible. The human brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons, interconnected by trillions of synapses. The prefrontal cortex is particularly critical for planning, decision-making, and impulse control. Neuroimaging studies show that tasks involving abstract reasoning or ethical dilemmas activate networks spanning multiple brain regions. This distributed architecture is one of the reasons humans can perform tasks no other species can. The structure of our nervous system itself reflects how far intelligence has advanced in passing evolutionary thresholds. Another layer of the test can be seen in the fragility of intelligence. High cognitive ability comes with vulnerabilities. The brain consumes about 20% of the body's energy, making it metabolically expensive. Human infants are born neurologically underdeveloped compared to other primates, requiring long periods of parental care. This means that passing the test of intelligence also demanded parallel developments in social cooperation, extended families, and cultural systems to protect vulnerable young. Intelligence was not a free advantage. It was a risky evolutionary gamble that had to be balanced with support systems. As we look at intelligence in the broader context of Earth as a test, one pattern becomes clear. At each stage, new forms of cognition opened opportunities, but also imposed costs. Species had to balance these costs with survival strategies. Some, like the great apes, succeeded partially but did not expand globally. Others, like humans, crossed the thresholds completely, leading to a dominance that reshaped the biosphere. This suggests that intelligence itself is not inevitable. It is the outcome of repeated testing across millions of years, with failure as the more common result. From bacteria sensing chemicals to humans designing spacecraft, the story of intelligence is a continuum of thresholds. Each stage can be thought of as a test. Can an organism process information? Can it adapt behavior flexibly? Can it develop self-awareness? Can it cooperate socially? Can it externalize knowledge? And finally, can it adapt to diverse and unpredictable environments? By framing intelligence this way, science provides a systematic account of how Earth's conditions acted as a testing ground. Only a small number of species passed each stage, and ultimately, only one species, humans, reached the level of global symbolic intelligence. This chapter shows us that Earth is not merely a place where life exists. It is a place where cognition itself is shaped, tested, and filtered. The thresholds of intelligence are not arbitrary. They are responses to physical, ecological, and social challenges. In that sense, the rise of human intelligence is not just an accident. It is the result of a long sequence of evolutionary tests imposed by the earthly environment. Cultural evolution as test of societies. When we examine the story of humanity, it is not enough to study biology alone. Human beings are unique in that survival is not based only on genes, but also on culture. Culture refers to the accumulation of shared knowledge, practices, beliefs, technologies, and social institutions that are passed down across generations. From a scientific perspective, cultural evolution operates alongside biological evolution, but it functions at a faster pace. Genes change slowly, over thousands or millions of years. Culture can change in a single generation. This rapid adaptability is both a strength and a source of vulnerability. To think of Earth as a test, we must explore how societies and their cultural systems themselves face constant examinations of resilience, cooperation, and adaptability. The first evidence of cultural evolution is found in early tool use. Archaeological records show that stone tools were being crafted over 2.5 million years ago by Homo habilis. These were not random stones, but carefully flaked to create sharp edges for cutting. This marks the beginning of what scientists call technological culture. The test at this stage was whether early humans could transmit useful knowledge across individuals and generations. Without culture, each individual would have to rediscover the technique from scratch. With culture, knowledge could accumulate, improving tools over time. This illustrates a critical principle. Cultural transmission is itself a test. Societies that fail to transmit their accumulated knowledge stagnate, while those that succeed grow in complexity. By around 300,000 years ago, we see more sophisticated technologies emerging in Homo sapiens. Spears, pigments, and evidence of symbolic behavior appear in the record. These artifacts suggest that humans were not only surviving physically, but also beginning to develop symbolic culture, art, ritual, and perhaps language. Symbolic culture allows abstract ideas to be shared and preserved. This represents a new kind of test. Can a society use shared meaning to organize cooperation on larger scales? For example, rituals might strengthen group identity, while symbolic markings could communicate ownership or territory. In evolutionary terms, groups that mastered symbolic communication had advantages over those that did not. As humans developed agriculture around 10,000 years ago, the scale of the cultural test increased dramatically. Hunter-gatherer bands were relatively small, often fewer than 150 individuals. This number corresponds to what anthropologist Robin Dunbar called the Dunbar's number, the approximate limit of relationships one brain can manage. With agriculture came villages, cities, and eventually civilizations, where thousands or millions of people had to live together. This scaling up required new cultural systems, laws, governance, trade networks, and shared belief systems. In this sense, agriculture was not only a technological innovation, but also a social test. Could societies manage cooperation among strangers? Could they prevent collapse under the weight of inequality, conflict, or resource scarcity? History shows us that many societies failed these tests. The collapse of the Maya civilization, the decline of the Roman Empire, and the disappearance of societies like the Indus Valley civilization demonstrate how fragile cultural systems can be. Environmental changes, resource depletion, disease, and internal conflict acted as stressors, testing the resilience of cultural structures. Anthropologists and historians study these collapses not as isolated failures, but as part of a larger scientific understanding. Societies, like organisms, face tests of adaptability. Those that cannot adapt to shifting pressures do not survive. The scientific framework of cultural evolution helps us understand this process more rigorously. Cultural traits, such as farming methods, religious practices, or technological inventions, spread in populations much like genetic traits do. They undergo variation, competition, and selection. For example, irrigation systems that produce more food tend to be adopted by more groups, while inefficient methods are abandoned. Languages that allow precise communication may spread, while others fragment and disappear. In this way, culture itself evolves. The test lies in whether a cultural trait enhances survival and cooperation, or undermines it. One striking example is writing. Writing systems emerged independently in multiple parts of the world, in Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and Mesoamerica. Writing allowed knowledge to be preserved beyond oral memory. It enabled complex administration, trade records, and historical continuity. But writing also created new vulnerabilities: the need for literacy, the danger of centralized control of information, and the emergence of rigid bureaucracies. Societies that mastered writing gained immense power, but they also faced new tests of inequality and governance. The written word both strengthened and destabilized human culture. Another major cultural test has been the development of governance and law. In small bands, social order can be maintained through kinship and direct reciprocity. But in large states, impersonal systems are required. The Code of Hammurabi, written around 1750 BCE, represents one of the earliest known law codes. It standardized rules of behavior, punishments, and rights. From a scientific point of view, codified law is a cultural adaptation to scale. It allowed large populations to coexist without constant violence. But laws are only effective if societies also develop enforcement mechanisms, legitimacy, and fairness. The test here is clear. Can a society build institutions strong enough to maintain order, yet flexible enough to adapt when conditions change? Many empires fell precisely because their institutions became too rigid or unjust. Cultural evolution also operates at the level of cooperation versus conflict. Human societies are constantly tested on whether they can expand cooperation beyond immediate kin groups. Evolutionary biologists describe this through the concept of multi-level selection. At the individual level, selfish behavior may provide short-term advantages. But at the group level, cooperation often wins in the long run. Groups that cooperate effectively outcompete those that cannot. The history of trade networks, alliances, and cultural exchange shows how societies that embraced cooperation often expanded, while isolated or hostile societies face stagnation. Yet cooperation has always been fragile. Warfare, conquest, and exploitation reveal the constant tension in this test. Science also shows us that culture can be maladaptive. Not every cultural trait is beneficial. Some may persist because of tradition or power structures, even if they harm survival. For example, overexploitation of resources, rigid social hierarchies, or resistance to innovation have all led to societal collapse. Anthropologist Joseph Tainter, in his study The Collapse of Complex Societies, argues that complexity itself can become a burden. Societies expand their institutions, technologies, and infrastructures, but eventually the costs outweigh the benefits. In this sense, cultural complexity itself is a test, one that many societies have failed to balance. Modern times provide additional examples of cultural tests. Industrialization brought immense progress in energy use, medicine, and technology, yet it also introduced challenges such as pollution, climate change, and inequality. Digital technology now accelerates cultural evolution at unprecedented speeds. Ideas spread globally in seconds. While this allows rapid adaptation, it also creates vulnerabilities to misinformation, polarization, and cultural fragmentation. Earth, as a testing ground, continually raises the stakes. Can societies adapt to their own inventions? Can cultural systems keep pace with technological acceleration? Anthropology and archaeology reveal that cultural tests are not random. They follow patterns. Repeatedly, societies are tested on resource management, governance, cooperation, adaptability, and innovation. Those that strike a balance between stability and flexibility endure longer. Those that fail collapse or fragment. Seen through this lens, Earth is not only testing biological survival, but also cultural resilience. The lesson of history is that passing one test only leads to another, often at a higher scale. In summary, cultural evolution represents one of the most important dimensions of the idea that Earth is a test. Unlike biological evolution, which is slow, cultural evolution is rapid and cumulative. But it is also fragile. Knowledge can be lost, institutions can collapse, and maladaptive traditions can persist. The scientific study of culture shows us that societies, like species, face constant tests of survival. Success is not guaranteed. Just as most species that ever lived are extinct, most civilizations that ever existed are gone. This pattern underscores the reality that cultural systems must continually prove their resilience against environmental, social, and technological pressures. In this chapter, we see that Earth is not simply testing individuals, nor even just species. It is testing entire systems of shared meaning and cooperation. The rise and fall of cultures demonstrate that survival depends not only on intelligence, but also on the structures we build to live together. Cultural evolution, with all its strengths and fragilities, is one of the clearest examples of how Earth functions as a constant testing ground. Technology and energy as stress tests. When we study the rise of human civilization, it becomes clear that technology and energy use have been among the most decisive factors in shaping our survival. Unlike other species, humans have not adapted solely through biological changes. Instead, we continually adapt by transforming our environment with tools, machines, and systems of energy extraction. From a scientific perspective, every major leap in human history is connected to a new way of harnessing energy. But each leap also comes with risks, costs, and thresholds of resilience. In this sense, technology and energy function as some of the most rigorous tests that Earth has placed before human societies. The first major step was the control of fire. Archaeological evidence suggests that hominins were using fire over 1 million years ago, with more reliable control emerging around 400,000 years ago. Fire provided warmth, protection, and the ability to cook food. Cooking itself is a critical adaptation, as it breaks down starches and proteins, making nutrients more accessible. This reduced the time humans needed to chew and digest, freeing more energy for the brain. Some anthropologists argue that fire was essential for the evolution of larger brains. But fire was not only a benefit, It also posed risks of burns, smoke inhalation, and uncontrolled wildfires. The test here was whether early humans could master fire's power without being destroyed by it. Those who succeeded gained a tremendous survival advantage. The next energy revolution came with agriculture. By domesticating plants and animals, humans were essentially capturing solar energy more efficiently. Instead of relying on wild food sources, societies could channel energy into fields and herds, dramatically increasing population density. Agriculture allowed villages and cities to form, but it also created new challenges. Dependence on a few staple crops meant vulnerability to drought, pests, and disease. Nutritional diversity decreased in many early farming societies, and archaeological studies show that average height and health often declined with the shift from foraging to farming. Thus, agriculture was both a technological breakthrough and a survival test. Could societies manage the risks of dependence while reaping the benefits of greater food supply? Over time, humans expanded energy use beyond food and fire. The domestication of animals introduced new sources of mechanical power: oxen for plowing, horses for transport, camels for trade across deserts. These innovations transformed economies and warfare, yet they also introduced ecological strains, such as overgrazing and deforestation. Here again we see the pattern. Each technological advance provided opportunities but also imposed new tests of sustainability. The Industrial Revolution represents one of the most dramatic moments in this story. Beginning in the 18th century, humans learned to convert the chemical energy stored in coal into mechanical power through steam engines. This was later followed by oil and natural gas, which provided even greater energy density. For the first time, societies were no longer limited by the muscle power of humans and animals. Factories, trains, and ships multiplied productivity on unprecedented scales. Populations exploded, life expectancy rose, and global trade expanded. But the costs were severe: air pollution, dangerous working conditions, and the beginnings of anthropogenic climate change. Earth was presenting a new kind of test. Could humanity handle the consequences of large-scale fossil fuel use? From a scientific standpoint, fossil fuels represent stored solar energy accumulated over millions of years. In less than 3 centuries, humans have consumed vast amounts of this store, reshaping the carbon cycle of the planet. This is a clear example of what systems theorists call a stress test. Rapid extraction and combustion of fossil fuels put pressure on Earth's atmospheric systems, leading to warming, ocean acidification, and disruption of ecosystems. Passing this test requires societies to transition to more sustainable energy sources. But the challenge is immense because fossil fuels are deeply embedded in modern economies. The discovery of electricity added another layer to this test. Electricity is not a primary energy source, but a carrier that allows energy to be transmitted and controlled with remarkable precision. The electrification of cities revolutionized communication, lighting, and industry. Yet it also introduced new vulnerabilities: dependence on grids, the risk of blackouts, and the need for constant maintenance of infrastructure. Electricity highlights how each energy leap tests not only physical survival, but also the complexity and stability of human systems. The nuclear age brought perhaps the most dramatic test so far. The splitting of the atom released energy millions of times greater than chemical combustion. On one hand, nuclear power offered a relatively clean and dense energy source. On the other hand, nuclear weapons introduced the possibility of global annihilation. The detonation of atomic bombs in 1945 demonstrated that human technology had crossed a threshold. For the first time, a species had developed the means to destroy its own civilization in a matter of hours. From a scientific perspective, this represents a survival test unlike any other. The question became whether humanity could manage the responsibility of such power. The Cold War showed how precarious this balance was, with multiple near misses where miscommunication nearly led to catastrophe. Nuclear technology remains a test humanity has not conclusively passed. In modern times, digital technology and computing have added further complexity. While not a direct energy source, the rise of information technology has transformed the way societies process and distribute knowledge. Supercomputers, artificial intelligence, and networks act as extensions of human cognition. Yet they consume vast amounts of energy themselves, and they introduce new risks: cyber warfare, surveillance, and dependence on fragile infrastructures. The test of digital technology is not only about energy, but about whether societies can handle the pace of change without destabilizing themselves. Looking ahead, renewable energy technologies, solar, wind, geothermal, and fusion research represent both opportunities and challenges. Solar and wind power harness natural flows of energy rather than finite reserves, but they require storage technologies, rare materials, and large-scale infrastructure. Fusion, if achieved, could provide abundant clean energy, but it remains technically elusive. These efforts represent the current stage of humanity's test. Can we transition to sustainable energy before the consequences of fossil fuel use become catastrophic? Scientists studying planetary boundaries emphasize that human societies are pressing against multiple ecological limits at once: carbon emissions, nitrogen cycles, biodiversity loss, and freshwater use. Each of these is tied to technology and energy. The survival of future generations depends on whether societies can innovate while maintaining balance. In system science, this is described as maintaining resilience in the face of stress. Resilience means the capacity to absorb shocks without collapsing. Energy systems are a central part of this resilience, and history shows that mismanagement leads to collapse. From a broader perspective, we can see the story of technology and energy as a sequence of tests. Can humans control fire without being consumed by it? Can we farm without exhausting the land? Can we industrialize without destroying ecosystems? Can we wield nuclear power without self-destruction? Can we transition to renewable energy before fossil fuels destabilize the planet? Each stage raises the stakes. Success provides greater power and survival potential, but failure brings larger risks. The scientific record makes clear that the test of technology is ongoing, and the outcome is not predetermined. Many societies in the past failed their energy tests and collapsed. The question for humanity today is whether we can learn from history and manage our technologies wisely enough to endure. Reflections on Earth as a test. As we arrive at the end of this exploration, it is important to step back and reflect on what the idea of Earth as a test truly means. Throughout these chapters, we have examined the question from multiple scientific angles: cosmology, biology, physics, technology, ethics, and philosophy. We have considered the role of advanced civilizations, the possibility of simulations, the laws of nature, the evolution of life, and the potential future of humanity. Each discipline adds a layer of understanding, yet none provides a definitive answer. And perhaps that is the most important realization of all. The hypothesis itself serves not only as a speculation about our place in the cosmos, but also as a framework for examining what it means to be human, to exist, and to progress. If Earth were a test, then the parameters of that test are embedded in the natural laws we study every day. The stability of gravity, the interactions of atoms, the complexity of DNA, the neural networks of the brain, all of these are consistent, measurable, and predictive. Science has revealed that reality is structured and coherent. In this sense, whether Earth is a test or not, the remarkable intelligibility of the universe is itself something to be deeply appreciated. If this were a designed experiment, then the rules are precise, elegant, and finely tuned. If not, then the fact that such order emerged naturally is equally astonishing. We also considered how life itself fits into a testing framework. Evolution by natural selection produces complexity, adaptation, and resilience. The emergence of consciousness allows for reflection, creativity, and ethical reasoning. Humanity, as one outcome of this process, carries the ability to question its own existence. In a scientific sense, this is extraordinary. The universe has produced a species capable of reflecting on the universe. If Earth is a test, then perhaps the core outcome is this very capacity for self-awareness. The philosophical dimensions of this idea also remain central. If Earth is a test, then what is being measured? Is it survival, cooperation, knowledge, or morality? Or perhaps the test has no single outcome but rather explores the range of possibilities that intelligent beings can generate. If this is the case, then humanity's diversity of cultures, philosophies, and innovations may not be a flaw but a feature of the test. From an ethical standpoint, the idea encourages responsibility. If we imagine ourselves as subjects of a test, we might live with greater awareness of our actions, our treatment of one another, and our stewardship of the planet. We also explored the future trajectory of humanity, technological growth, space exploration, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and the management of global crises. If Earth is a test, then these may represent milestones in the evaluation. How humanity navigates these challenges may determine whether the experiment demonstrates resilience and creativity or fragility and self-destruction. Regardless of the hypothesis, these are real challenges humanity must face, and they will shape the centuries to come. But perhaps the most important reflection is that the Earth as a test framework is itself a scientific thought experiment. It is a way of expanding the boundaries of inquiry, combining rigorous science with imaginative speculation. By asking whether Earth could be a test, we bring together cosmology, physics, biology, neuroscience, computer science, and ethics into a single conversation. Even if the hypothesis remains unprovable, the questions it raises enrich our understanding of science and philosophy alike. In closing, whether Earth is a test or simply a natural phenomenon, the responsibility lies with humanity to make meaning of its existence. The scientific tools we possess allow us to understand the world with increasing precision. The philosophical traditions we inherit challenge us to act with wisdom and compassion. The technological powers we are developing give us the capacity to shape the future in unprecedented ways. If Earth is a test, then perhaps the results are not predetermined. The outcome may depend on what we choose to do next, with our knowledge, with our resources, and with each other. In that sense, the question, what if Earth were just a test, becomes less about discovering an external evaluator and more about how we evaluate ourselves. Humanity, through science, ethics, and imagination, has the power to decide what success looks like. Whether the test is real or metaphorical, the challenge remains: to live responsibly, to seek knowledge, and to ensure that life on Earth and perhaps beyond continues to grow and flourish.